Hi, team. My name's Michael. I am a creator with a day job. Today, I'm continuing my story about how I've recently discovered I have aphantasia. Aphantasia is the inability to visualize things. What was fascinating to me is I only found this out a couple months ago. I didn't realize I have aphantasia. So now I'm kind of going back through my history trying to understand, what does this mean? What does this tell me about myself? Does this explain some things? I'm not sure. This isn't really a diagnosis. I'm just talking out loud and trying to explain my experiences, and we'll see from there. One thing I've always known is I have a terrible memory. I have another podcast where I chat with my friend, and he's always telling me stories from my childhood that I just don't remember. I remember some details of them, but not a lot. And he could recall all types of details. Oh, remember when we did this, this, and this? And I kind of piece it together. And a lot of times I go, well, yeah, that sounds like something I did, but I don't remember it. And I'm wondering if it's partly because of how I've been storing memories, because I can't really store things visually, that maybe they just don't stick as well. Here's an anecdote that just happened recently. I was out with my kids and one of our friends the other night, and I had said some joke. We were joking around at the table, and I ended up saying something really silly, and it had us all in stitches. And we were quoting it all night long, just, oh, this silly phrase, silly phrase. And everyone was laughing. I remember that. Then the next morning I woke up and my son came up to me. He's like, "Oh, Dad, that was the funniest thing." He's like, "I can't remember laughing so hard." I'm like, "Oh, yeah, yeah." I'm like, "What was it?" And then he reminded me, the silly saying I said, and we just kind of laughed. And now I could recall it. Now I remember the saying, but I don't think I would have without him prompting me the next day, which just goes, my first interactions with things don't really stick well. Another thing is, I know I can't remember people's faces. It's not so much facial blindness as when I see people, I recognize them. I could recognize my family and friends from a mile away. If I see photos, I know exactly who they are. But the minute I'm not looking at them, it's hard for me to recall an image of them. And I'd be really curious to sit with like a police sketch artist and see if this is true or not. From what I think is, it's associated with the aphantasia, the fact that I have a hard time visualizing things, that I can't store people's faces. But boy, I recognize them right away. So there is an imprint. I just can't recall that imprint. Another thing is, somebody asked me if I dream. I absolutely do dream, and I do have vivid dreams. Do I remember them? No. But I do wake up in the middle of the night out of a dream and will, at that moment, recall it, know what's going on, be aware that I just had a very vivid dream. Another story I remember is when I was in my freshman year of high school. I was in science and I wasn't doing well in this class. And I remember after school one day, you could optionally take an exam to try to get into an honors class for biology the next year. Well, I found out if I took that exam, I could get out of my water polo practice. So I took the exam. And apparently I aced it. I did very well on this exam. It was a multiple choice kind of exam. I more or less had just learned a bunch of tips and tricks at a camp the year prior on how to take generic multiple choice questionnaires. So I actually applied that. It's not that I actually knew any of the subject. I just applied what I had learned. Quite, cheeky of me, but that's what I did. And then when we found out I got into the class, my science teacher came up to me and said, "Oh, Michael, you should drop out. You're definitely not qualified. You're failing my class and you shouldn't do this." And I said, "Oh, okay, yeah, I'll drop out." And then I didn't. I honestly just forgot about it. And then he went to my mom and said, "Oh, Michael should drop out. He's not very smart." And that made my mom angry. So my mom's like, "You're going to pass that class and you're going to take that honors class." I said, just to spite this guy. My mom's awesome. So I said, okay. And so we had to study and memorize the periodic table of elements. And my mom would stay up all night, flashcards and training me and all this. And I can't say how hard that was because for a lot of people, they could memorize the columns and know, oh, this is the noble gases, this is that, and place things. There's people who can use different colored markers and identify when they're taking an exam. Oh, it's about this part. I remember I wrote that in purple. None of that works for me. So I actually had to memorize all these elements, all their attributes and everything, and not being able to use any of the helpers around the placement on the periodic table. And I remember struggling, and long short, I barely passed that science class, which allowed me to take the honors class. I did take the honors class. It was biology, which is nothing but memorization. Absolutely barely passed that. Luckily, it was an honors class, so it counted as a C. So I passed. And that freshman year teacher never spoke to me again. So there's that. But funny, a little anecdote. I like that story. And now looking back on it, I'm wondering if maybe that explains why I couldn't learn it. It doesn't explain why I was, maybe. My name is Michael. I am a creator with a day job. If you like this, please subscribe, like, hit the notifications. Please leave comments.